Welcome to our Torah Tuesday. We were off last week because of Sukkot, but we're back. And I'm just glad you're tuning in, glad you're here. So let me begin by praying. Well, Father God, thank you. Thank you for your feast days that we had this last week. Thank you for the time of ingathering that it represents. Those of us that were involved in celebrating the feast, I'm sure, can look on them and see that God, that you have moved in our lives in some way. And we know that these prefigure, these foretell the ingathering of your people at the end times. And many of us believe that that's getting awfully close due to some of the other stuff that's going on in the world right now. So it was a privilege to be involved in Sukkot. And we ask that you bless us as we begin this new Torah cycle, and as we move ahead in your plan. Bless our discussion tonight as we look at your word. In Yeshua's name, amen. Okay, so we need to do a review since it has been 2 whole weeks. If you remember last time, we're in the book of Genesis. We're not going through the cycle as that's strictly defined by it's been defined by the sages since way back before Yeshua, in which the whole Torah, all 5 books, Genesis through Deuteronomy, have divided into 54 parts, and they go through the parts in such a way that you can be through the whole Torah in 1 year. And as a matter of fact, last week, by that schedule, was the last chapter in Deuteronomy. So one of the things we do at the Sukkot celebration is we read the last chapter of Deuteronomy. So the 8th day is Simcha Torah, which means Simcha is joy. So it's the joy of the Torah, and it's where if you'd been doing it the way they traditionally do it, you'd be at the end of the Torah scroll. The Torah scroll would have been completely gone from one side to the other, and you'd be at the very last page, and you'd be reading the very last chapter of Deuteronomy. And so they roll the Torah scroll all the way back to Genesis 1:1. And they have a big celebration, and they dance around, and that's what Simcha Torah is, and that's the thing that happened late last week. So now, on that schedule, we'd be starting at Genesis 1:1. We decided to go a little different route, and one of the reasons we did that is when you go through the Torah cycle in in a portion per week kind of a schedule, you go pretty fast. And a lot of times there are things that you kind of gloss over because you don't have time to discuss them, because you've got to move on. Next week you've got to be at the next portion. So what we decided to do was just kind of go for an hour and a half each week when we meet, and at the end of that time we'll just put a bookmark there and come back and pick up where we left off. So the last time we met, we were in Genesis chapter 37. Joseph, this is where we learn about Joseph, and Joseph had his dreams, if you remember. He was, starts off in chapter 37, Joseph was 17, and he didn't get along well with his brothers, and I want to talk about that for a couple of minutes. One of the things he did, he had these dreams. God had given Joseph a couple of dreams. One of them was where he and his brothers were gathering sheaves of wheat, and at one point in time, all his brothers came to him, and their sheaves bowed down to him, and his remained upright. Now, we're going to talk a lot about dreams tonight. It's not too hard to interpret that dream, in that it shows that somehow or another, all of Joseph's brothers were going to bow in subservience to Joseph. Joseph, the youngest, not quite the youngest, but certainly the second to the youngest of all of Jacob's sons, and a 17-year-old smart aleck, for all likelihood, comes and brags about these dreams to his brothers, who are already pretty irritated with him because his dad had shown a great deal of favoritism toward Joseph, so they basically hated him. And the Bible says that exact thing. Verse 4 of chapter 37 says, when his brothers saw that their father loved him, Joseph, more than any of them, They hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. So then when he comes and tells them about his dreams, they hate him all the more. And we talked about that, and I want to talk a little more about that in a minute. But anyway, we went through, and they hated Joseph so bad they were going to kill him. But rather than kill him, they decided to throw him in this pit. And along just happened to come these caravan of slave traders, Ishmaelite slave traders, who pulled him out of the pit and gave Joseph's brothers 20 pieces of silver for him and made him a slave and hauled him off to Egypt to sell him. Then there's a little interlude in chapter 38 about Judah and Tamar. Tamar is Judah's daughter-in-law. And the story there, I won't go into the story, but it's a very interesting story. And then we're going to start off tonight with chapter 39. Before I do that, I wanted to make a comment in general on this stuff. The word Torah is translated typically in English as law. And when you look at the Torah, there are, and certainly in the book of Leviticus, for example, there are many places where it says, thou should do this, thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that, do this, do that, don't do this, and all kinds of laws, just what a law ought to be. But that's really less than 25% of the Torah. The rest of the Torah, the vast majority of the Torah, is the things like we've just been reading. We've read the story of Joseph, just this part so far. The dysfunctional family of Jacob. I mean, wouldn't you have hated to be in Jacob's family? I mean, he had 4 wives, two real wives and 2 not so real wives, if you will. They're the handmaidens of the wives. And of those 2 wives, one of them he really loved, and the other one, it's not that he didn't love her, he just didn't make any bones about the fact that he loved her sister more. Okay? And then you have this dynamic where the wife that Jacob really, really loved couldn't conceive, it would appear. And the one that he didn't care so much about had babies, had sons, had 6 sons before it was all over, had more sons than any other wife. And she lived her whole life thinking that surely he will love me now that I've provided him all these sons. Say what? Yep. And then Rachel, on the other hand, spent just anguished about being barren. Back in those times, a barren woman was a very bad thing to be. Anyway, all of this was well known to the families, to the people involved. And the sons, every one of those sons, all of Jacob's sons, knew exactly who their mother was, right? And they knew whether they were the son of a concubine or the son of one of his real wives. And they knew whether they were the son of the wife he didn't love versus the son of the wife he did love, namely Joseph. At this point, there was Benjamin, but typically at this point in the story, people think Benjamin was fairly young. So Benjamin and Joseph are the 2 blessed sons, the 2 favored sons, and all the others are kind of chopped liver, And Jacob didn't do much to try to not have that be the case. I mean, as a matter of fact, I think, it's, okay, where I'm going with this, what I'm really trying to say is that why do stories like that exist in a book of law? Okay, there's 2 places that we could look to have that answered, and I actually put little bookmarks in here. You can write down the scripture references, but I'm going to read them to you. One of them is, if I can find the right ones, Philippians 4 verses 8 through 9, 8 and 9. So this is Paul talking to the believers at Philippi, and he says, he's exhorting them to behave and to obey and to do lots of different things, rejoice in the Lord always. But again, verse 8, it says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. So he's encouraging his disciples to think about the good things. Think about the stuff think about the events. Think about people's lives and people's actions that are admirable, that are praiseworthy. Now, whenever we read about Jacob and his sons, that's just the opposite, right? They aren't praiseworthy. But that's the whole point of stories. As a matter of fact, a lot of times, if you think about this, a lot of times you learn more valuable lessons from failures than you do from successes. All right? And that's what we have in Jacob. Jacob's had a lot of failures. And it's kind of interesting. You sit there and trace them back, but you can learn a lot about how you're supposed to behave by looking at how people didn't behave that way, how the people that didn't behave that way got in trouble. But a better one even than that is, and this one I'm sure you're all familiar with this one. It's 2 Timothy 3:16. 2 Timothy 3:16, and this is Paul again. He's writing to his one of his favorite guys, Timothy. He says, "All Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work." So, all Scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, and correcting, and training in righteousness. The point I want to make is this is the Scripture he was referring to. He couldn't be referring to much of any else because this is mainly what they had. This was the cornerstone of everything, was the Torah. So this is instruction. And the word Torah can much better be translated as teaching and instruction than law. So these stories are important. That's the main thing I wanted to say. And the reason I wanted to say that is because of what we're going to be reading about tonight. So, Joseph had his dreams about his brothers. He had two dreams. He had that one, and they had the one about the sun, the moon, and the stars, and how they all bowed down to him. Even his father was a little bit upset about that one. If you remember it, let's see, if you want to read about that one, I'll show you where that is. It's verse 9, chapter 37, verse 9. It says, "Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. 'Listen,' he said, 'I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me.'" Again, interpreting that dream's not too hard. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So I just want you to remember those dreams. Okay. And then didn't we talk last time? That's when, yes. The chapter 37 also talks about how Joseph ended up with this richly ornamented robe, the traditional coat of many colors that he honored his son Joseph with, as opposed to all his more elder sons. Joseph was the one that got the honor of wearing this richly ornamented robe. Anyway, beg your pardon? No, this was 37. Genesis 37. Sorry about that. Anyway, I guess I wanted to ask a question or two about that. How should Jacob's sons, excluding Joseph, how should they have reacted to Joseph's apparent good fortune? I mean, a lot of people would say Jacob did exactly the wrong thing by favoring Joseph over his other brothers. He provoked them to jealousy. He's the guy that's at fault here. He's the one that did the wrong thing. It was Jacob's fault that those brothers were envious and hateful. So what do you think about that? Do you think that's true? I don't
Just
think
in a
it's
way,
true.
maybe?
In a way. I think what you could do, go ahead, what were you going to say?
Maybe Joseph was very nice and he was abiding by the law, and the
Yeah.
others were not.
Well, the others were not. I guess what I was going to say, I think, I'll put it this way. As a matter of fact, I remember we looked at it. There's a parable in, I've got it written down here, a parable in one of the Gospels that talks about it's about the rich man that hired guys to work in his field, and he goes to the place where these guys are hanging around early in the morning and says, "I'll pay you a denarius to work in my field all day," and they say yes, and then he comes back 2 or 3 hours later and he hires some more, and then he comes back 2 or 3 hours later and hires some more. He comes back about an hour before quitting time and he hires some more, and then when it's time to quit, he tells his steward, he says, "Have all the guys line up and take the ones that came in last and pay them," and so. The guys that only worked for an hour or two got a denarius. And the guys in the front of the line, the guys that had been working since early in the morning, they got their denarius too. And they grumbled, they griped, they said, "That's not fair. These guys have only worked an hour or so, and you gave them the same thing that you gave us." And you remember the guy's response? He said,
"Didn't I hire you for the same?"
He said, "It's my money. Can't I do with my money what I want to do? And whenever I told you, would you work in my field for a day for a denarius, you agreed to. So why are you complaining to me?" So I maintain that that's exactly the same position Jacob was in. Jacob could favor his son if he wanted to. That was his privilege to do that. Now you could argue that it may not have been very wise. Right? You can argue that he might have gotten everybody on the same page, and the family atmosphere might have been greatly improved if he had been nicer to the sons that were not when a parent loves one child more than another, you could argue they would be a lot better off if they wouldn't let the children know that. Some children figure it out anyway. Do you have something, Marvin?
Yeah, I think that he's got some part of the blame, but not all of it. I mean, they're responsible for their actions.
Exactly.
And so I think where he fell short, you're absolutely right about he can favor whoever he wants, but he didn't train those other sons up as well as he did Joseph.
Yes.
That's where he fell down.
Yep, that's exactly right. He, anyway, that's right. So I think it's instructional to sit there and look at this, any of these stories, but certainly this story, and ask yourself, what am I supposed to get out of this story? Why is this story in here, God, and why do you have me reading it? And the answer ought to be, I think, so that you can think about these things. And you can ask yourself, what would I have done if I'd been Reuben or Simeon or Levi? What would I have done, I can't imagine any of those guys thinking to themselves, well, it doesn't seem fair, but, Joseph's a good guy and he loves him best, so I guess that's okay. I'll go with it. But that's basically what they should have done, I think. That's my opinion.
After what he had been through with his sons, I'm amazed that he didn't keep a closer eye on them.
Well, yeah. I was going to say, the seeds of the problem and how severe the problem was back when Simeon and Levi led the rebellion on Shechem. Because, when they clearly went behind Jacob's back, because he found out about it the next day, and he was mad, and he says, "Look what you've done. You've made me, a stench in the nostrils of our neighbors. If they all join together, they can just wipe us out. And we have to move now because you've ruined us. We can't live here in this neighborhood." And you remember the son's response? The sons, Levi and Simeon, says, "Well, were you just going to let him treat our sister like a prostitute?" I mean, it wasn't anything like let's reason with him or let's ask forgiveness or anything like that. It was tough, right? So right there, you knew that there's bad stuff going on, And we talked about that little interlude with Judah and Tamar and how it must have been so bad in the house, the atmosphere in the family, that he decided he had to get out. So he went off and lived somewhere else for a while. Anyway, the main point I was trying to make about all of that, other than just review, was to get you in the habit of, when you read these stories, ask yourself, what am I supposed to get out of them? And how did these people feel? Why did they do the things they did? And what does it teach me about my life? What does it teach me? Because that's got to be what they're here for. That's got to be the reason these stories are here, so that we can learn what God expects from us.
I guess showing favoritism is not a good thing.
It's not. I think in general, it's not. On the other hand, heck, it goes right back at the very beginning, because with Cain and Abel, what was Cain's big beef? Well, Cain's big beef was that God's, accepted and looked with favor upon Abel's sacrifice, but he didn't on Cain's. And Cain's face was downcast. And God came to him, right? And he says, don't you know that if you do right, I'll honor you. So I guess my point is, that's the same lesson if you ask me. Yeah. So I don't know. These things are important because they have real basic influences on the way your relationship with God should work. And the way I always phrase that is, God's God and you're not. And if he wants to bless this guy standing right beside you that from your standpoint clearly doesn't deserve it, that's his privilege. And you need to say, okay. And we're going to talk about that more as we go through the life of Joseph. Anyway, I'm glad I did that just because I think it's such a powerful thing. So let's go on here. Chapter 39. Joseph, if you'll remember, is now in Egypt. And we just got through reading about Judah and Tamar. And so chapter 39 takes us back to Joseph. So I'm going to read for a few verses, chapter 39, and then we'll stop and talk about it. Chapter 39. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. Yahweh was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that Yahweh was with him, and that Yahweh gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes, and because of his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So he left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. So, how'd Joseph do as Potiphar's slave? Yeah.
Must be nice. Yeah,
but now Joseph didn't come into that job, right? He didn't apply for it, and Potiphar say, okay, I'm looking for a guy that can manage all my household. Okay, I'll pick you. He didn't do that. What happened, Joseph started, if you will, in the mailroom, right? He started at the bottom, some slave, Potiphar didn't know much about him, and he prospered. And the Bible very clearly says it wasn't Joseph that prospered, it was God that prospered Joseph. So everything he touched did well. But Potiphar, being no fool, said, man, this guy's pretty good. I think I'll put him in charge of more stuff. And the more he put him in charge of, the more he did well. And so God blessed Joseph. So what credit or what part do you suppose Joseph played? I'll let you ask your question first, and we'll talk about
Well, it says the blessing of the Lord was on everything he had, both in his house and in his fields. We're getting ready to read the next verse, and he's got a problem and Potiphar's got a problem in his house.
Yes, he does. Yep.
So I think that's interesting. That's all I wanted to say.
Yep. That's fine. The number one, Potiphar found him obviously trustworthy. So Joseph wasn't trying to flim-flam him or lie to him or anything like that. And that must have just come about because Potiphar dealt with him day in and day out, and he recognized the kind of person that Joseph is. But what part did Joseph play in all of this? What could he have done to make this not be that way?
Being unfaithful and
Yeah.
not good at his job.
Yeah? He could have sat there and whined and whined and whined about why am I here. He could have whined to God, why did you do this to me? I didn't deserve this. He could have constantly been trying to find a way out. He could say, and I'm sure we'll see. He made no bones about the fact that he didn't deserve to be there. But while he was there, he did what was required of him.
And it goes back to when he was a kid, his father taught him better. He taught him about God. That's what he did.
Yeah.
And he bought into it, and he believed it, and he lived it.
Yeah, yeah. And it took no small amount of faith to do that. Because for Joseph, I mean, man, his life was, let's see, the event of his brothers putting him in the well and then being sold into slavery obviously was the low point of his life. Well, maybe not, but it was pretty low, right? Because he knew he'd never see him again, and that he'd probably die. Slaves died young ages. He'd probably die in Egypt as a slave. That's what he knew. Yeah. Yep. Yep. No, that's all right. We need you. Could you say that just a little bit again? Because, yeah.
So imagine Joseph, the
Yep.
betrayal that he felt by his brothers
Yep.
doing that to him.
Yeah. From the standpoint, his brothers hated him, and he had to be aware of that. But on the other hand, giving him the benefit of the doubt, I don't think he came up and told his brothers about these dreams just out of, needling them. I think he basically said, I had this dream. It was a big deal to me. I think it was from God, and I'd like to tell you about it. But their hearts, they said, yeah. What were you going to say?
Do we know how old Joseph was when his brothers
Yep.
pitched him out?
17. I can tell you exactly, and I'll tell you why.
Okay, so he was that old.
Well,
All right.
it was at least that. Let me show you. Chapter 37, verse 2 says, this is the account of Jacob, and then it says, Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks of his brothers, and blah, blah. So given that the selling into slavery may have happened a year or two later, but I don't think he was over 20. I think he's probably somewhere between 17 and 20.
And in those days, the children were taught to obey.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So-
some of them did better than others.
Right. So
Yeah,
being
yeah.
in that position, he already had
Yep,
good
yep.
training.
Yep. But imagine how Joseph must have felt about God. I mean, that would have been a real test. Here I am in the middle of Egypt being sold into slavery under Potiphar, and I'm sure he searched his heart and he said, what did I do wrong? What did I do to deserve this? And and that takes a lot of guts, and it takes a lot of looking. And I bet he spent many a night sitting there thinking about it. And to me, he probably concluded, well, I'm sure I didn't do everything right, but I don't think I did anything that was deserving of this. That's my opinion. I think he said, well, God must have something else in mind. Don't know what, but here I am. I'm going to make the best of it. And so he knew that making the best of it meant doing the best job he could at what God put right in front of him, which was helping, being Pharaoh's slave. Yep, yep. It becomes more and more apparent. But on the other hand, he waited a long time. Let's see what else I want to say about that. Joseph had a submissive heart. That's really what he had. So, moving along here. I'm going to go, it's the very end part of chapter 6. It says, now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day, he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. And when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." And she kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story. "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When the master heard the story his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Okay? So let's talk about that for a minute. I can't help, I think I've told you before about this movie that I highly recommend called Joseph it's a Lube production, L-U-B-E production. Let's see, I remember it's got Ben Kingsley is in a part of Potiphar, and Leslie Ann Warren, I think, is Potiphar's wife. And she does such, I can't hardly read the story without thinking of that, the way they do. Because, anyway, let's talk about this story for a minute. So you see what Joseph said to her, what his point was. You know, his point was, your husband, my master, has entrusted me with absolutely everything. How in the world could I do such a thing to him? Yes.
Do we know how long he's been with Potiphar at this point?
No, we don't. Now, it's fair to assume that it was a few years, because he had to be with Potiphar long enough for Potiphar to trust him enough to put him in charge of more and more and more and rely on him more and more and more. So it must have been, I would say, a few years. And Joseph, you know, I'm sure he still was probably very despondent, if you will, that he couldn't go home, that he was a slave. But he had made the most out of a bad situation because he was obviously in a pretty good position. And for her to do this must have been a great temptation, you know, because but Joseph, if nothing else, he knew what humility was.
Right, and he knew God was with him. He knew that.
Yes, he had
knew
to know that.
He knew it wasn't all him.
Yep.
Do you think Potiphar really thought he did such a thing?
Well, we'll get to that. I was going to tell you my answer, but what do you suppose would typically happen to a slave that was caught doing what Joseph was accused of?
Kill you.
His head would leave his body immediately, right? He'd be gone. And what did Potiphar actually do with him?
Put him in jail.
Put him in jail. As a matter of fact, this movie that I admire so much makes a big subplot out of that, because Potiphar's wife says that was insulting to her. And Potiphar looks at her and says, "I know you, and I know him, and I know he would never do what you accused him of doing." So, but the thing is, you don't get that. The reason we get that, aside from watching the movie, is because we can sit here and talk about it. And I remember the first time I read this story as a little boy thinking that, well, gee, that's kind of convenient that he just put him in prison. I wonder why I didn't just chop his head off or something, because that's what slaves typically happen, and that's because Potiphar knew. You know? So Joseph, indeed, must have been quite the example, quite the godly person. So, to finish the chapter, Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So that wasn't Devil's Island. It was probably even one of the halfway decent prisons, if you could call it that, but it was still prison. But while Joseph was there in prison, Yahweh was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. So if I were Joseph and I got thrown in prison for this, I'd be pretty upset with God. But Joseph evidently was able to rally and say, well, God, you know, in for a nickel, in for a dime. It doesn't seem to make sense to me, but you must be in this. This seems to be going from bad to worse. But, you know, he trusted God so far, so he figured I might as well trust him more of the way.
You
Go
could you could look at it like it's trials. It's a trial
Yeah.
for Joseph to see if he passes it.
Yep. Yep.
And
That's
each
a lot
time
of
he
it.
did.
It's a lot of it. Yep.
It's like you said, what are we getting out of these stories, right?
Yes.
So all of us in the future or near future, we will have to endure hardship.
Yeah.
We should not ramble with whatever situation we
Yep.
get thrown into
Let
and do the best we can.
Yep. Yep. Let me tell you how I've viewed this in my own life. It's whenever I'm facing some hardship, some trial, I think there's one of two reasons for this. Either I've done something and this is the just consequences for something that I've done. And by and large, those are pretty obvious. I mean, you know, speeding down the highway and I get pulled over and get a ticket. I mean, I can't blame me or God for that, right? That's just, I did something stupid and I have to pay for it. But if it's not anything that I can directly relate to something that I've done, some past sin that I've not dealt with, then it must be something that he's doing. And whenever God does stuff like that in your life, he's doing it for two reasons. One reason is to change your character, to develop your character, to enhance your relationship with him. But another is for the people that are involved. You know, I'm in a personal situation now that's kind of like that. I mean, I'm unhappy with this, but I know what's going on, and I know that I'm developing I'm becoming more compassionate about other people, and at the same time, I'm ministering in the life of a person that really needs it. So you look for what God might be doing with this, other than just making your life uncomfortable.
Even when you have to deal with difficult people
Yeah.
and relatives, God is trying to teach you something.
Yeah. I remember I used to have a great deal of difficulty dealing with bosses. You know, if my bosses were the least bit flaky or out of line, I'd tell them about it. So I was always in conflict. And I remember actually looking back and kind of counting on my hand and seeing that, man, I really have had this long succession of what I consider to be bad bosses and bad relationships and bad situations. And I remember kind of hearing God tell me, well, we're going to go around this mountain until you figure it out. You know, you're going to keep getting bosses like that till you learn how to deal with it. And that's the truth. He works with us that way. He does things in our life that not only affect other things, but also affect us. And so sometimes I pray, you know, I don't know what it is that you have for me to learn here, but help me hurry up and figure it out because I don't like this. And you have to do that sometimes. So, but that's what Joseph was doing. I mean, you know, Joseph must have been in prison thinking, my gosh, I was doing okay as a slave. You know, I'd made the best out of that. You had blessed me, and I'd made the best out of that. But why on earth am I in prison? What did I do to deserve this?
Probably felt, you know, how the devil attack you for being faithful.
Yes. That's right. And we'll know that, as obviously you know how the story ends. Yeah. But let's go on. Chapter 40. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. Since these guys were muckety-mucks in the government, if you will, they got a slave to attend them, and it was Joseph. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came in to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials, who were in custody with him in the master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." And then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream, I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. This is what it means," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison, for I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." "This is what it means," Joseph said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift your head and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat away your flesh." Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. Verse 23, one of the saddest verses in the Bible. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Go ahead, Luz.
So, as you mentioned, this guy was decapitated for a lesser crime than Joseph.
Yeah.
So that's showing us right there that
Yeah, that was the kind of society he lived in. So Joseph being put into prison was kind of like, don't do that. You know, it was a. No wonder his wife was upset. She said in the movie, she said, "I can't go out in public anymore." Well, he said, "Well, I know you." So yeah, you're right. So it shows that there's more things afoot here than the story actually tells. Notice though that the Bible only tells you what you really need to know. You get to figure out the rest of this stuff, and it's awesome. It seldom. Well, let's see. It sometimes says things like his heart was filled with hate or stuff like that. It sometimes says things about how someone felt, but most of the time it's just the action. This happened, then that happened, then that happened, and you're left to kind of put together why that happened. So, but that's fun, if you ask me. That's what makes studying it fun. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, what do you think about the dreams themselves? Go ahead, Marvin.
In verse 40.8, the last part of the verse tells you everything you need to know about Joseph and his beliefs and his relationship with God in that little ending of that verse.
Which verse? Verse 8?
48.
40, verse 8. We both had dreams, they answered, but there is no one to interpret them. Then Joseph said to them,
There it comes.
"Do not interpretations belong to God?"
End of statement.
Yep.
That tells you everything you need to know.
Yep.
He's close.
Yep. And he knows enough to not take credit.
Correct.
Yeah. So back to the dreams. I'm doing this a little bit backwards, but it's fun. The first 2 dreams we know about Joseph were the ones he had with his brothers and when he was at home. And we didn't have any trouble interpreting those dreams, right? We could figure out pretty much what they meant. I couldn't have figured these 2 dreams out from just the dreams themselves. So it had to be true that God interpreted dreams. But I don't guess I want to go too far with that. We'll come back to these dreams in a little bit.
Let me ask you a question.
Okay.
In 40 verse 8, it doesn't tell you if there's much time between them revealing the dreams and him telling them what they were.
Oh, it's almost instantaneous. Yeah.
Right. So it he didn't even have to think about it.
No. I think it
Interesting.
just happened almost immediately. Let's see. Oh, I thought it was interesting. This is a definite railroad track off to the side here, but verse 20, chapter 40, verse 20. Now the third day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a great feast for all his officials. So a lot of people get hung up on birthdays. Are celebrating birthdays a biblical thing to do? And there's nowhere in the Bible where it says you shouldn't celebrate your birthday. Personally, I used to make a bigger deal about my birthday than I do anymore. But birthdays are they're all right, if you ask me. No more. Yeah, no more. But this is one of the occasions about celebrating birthdays that's mentioned in the Bible. So, one of the things you do, celebrating birthdays biblical, you could say, well, what does the Bible say about them? Well, it doesn't say thou shalt not celebrate birthdays, but here's an example of a birthday that was celebrated, and it was attended. I mean, it brought death, right? It brought death to the poor baker. Can you think of any other birthdays in the Bible that are mentioned?
Going off the subject real quick, what do you think the baker did?
Oh, it's hard to say. We could think about it a while. It would appear, or let's see, the legend is some personal belonging of Pharaoh's went missing. And he knew it had to be one of those two that took it. And over the course of time that they had been in prison, somebody found it in the baker's possessions. That's just a legend. It could have been something that simple. But somehow or another, Pharaoh was convinced that the baker was guilty and the cupbearer was not. I don't know what it was.
Potiphar's and, is that the same guy? Potiphar's and Pharaoh? No.
No.
not.
No. Go ahead. So the question on the table is, what are other celebrations of birthdays?
I can remember the gift.
Okay, what's that?
John the Baptist's head.
Yeah. Salome. Salome was King Herod's, I think Herod, daughter. And she did this great dance at his birthday party, and he was all taken by her beauty and her skill at dancing, and said, you can have anything you want up to half of my kingdom. And she says, I want John the Baptist's head on a platter. Yeah. Then there's one other one. It's more vague than that, and I'm not sure how much I believe it, but it's got to do with the book of Job. The book of Job talks about Job's sons and daughters and how they would get together, and it implies that once a year, it kind of implies they were celebrating birthdays. So none of that means anything really. But if somebody says, do you think celebrating birthdays is biblical? You could go to those and say, based on that, I choose not to celebrate birthdays. I personally don't think it's that big a deal, but whatever. I think questions like that are interesting. So that was just a side thing. Were you going to say something, Dave? Uh-oh, got something for birthdays from Dave.
No, I was just wondering, talking about the baker, is there anything in Yasher or Enoch about the baker that maybe other than bad biscuits?
I don't know. That's a very good question. I've not looked about that in there. That's a good homework assignment for you. Yep. Okay. Let's move on, and we're going to do this. We're going to move into chapter 41, but I don't intend to finish it. So I want to talk about it, and we'll go back and play some more with dreams. But this is the second set of dreams that Joseph has been involved with, right? He got the two that occurred when he was home with his family, and then we have these two with the cupbearer and the baker who ended up dying and the cupbearer who ended up forgetting about him. But So let's go on. Chapter 41 is a very, very fascinating chapter. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile, and when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. And then the Pharaoh woke up. Verse 5. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. And then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. In the morning his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was hanged." So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." "I cannot do it," Joseph replied to Pharaoh, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." So that's another thing that you just pointed out, Marvin, was, Joseph is not taking credit here. He's giving credit where it belongs. So then Pharaoh said to Joseph, verse 17, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "In my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. And after them 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first. But even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had done so. They looked just as ugly as before, and then I woke up." Verse 22, "In my dreams I also saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them 7 other heads sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads. I told this to the magicians, but none could explain it to me." Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt, and let the Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt, except during the 7 years of abundance. During the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store them in the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may be ruined by the famine." So we'll stop there, because those dreams deserve to be discussed. So, what's the significance of the fact that these two dreams are similar? That was one of my favorite things about it, is verse 32. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in two forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. So he tells him, not only is this going to happen, it's going to happen soon, and I'm not going to change my mind. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. No, you're all right. Okay.
You're all right, Jerry.
So I like that. There was another thing that's interesting in there. I mean, you can, did I read over the part and miss it? Did he say that what Pharaoh should do has also been depicted in the dream? I mean, not only are these dreams telling about what's going to happen, but they're telling him what he should do to prepare for what's going to happen. Go ahead.
Well, if his dream just consisted of the cows and the grain, maybe God told Joseph what he needed to do, but it wasn't in the dream. That was a little additional information.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, interpret the dream. You're going to have 7 good years, you're going to have 7 bad, so you better store it up.
Okay.
I'm done. That's the dream.
You're right. He could have done it short like that. That's very interesting. That's interesting. Why didn't he? I don't know. According to this, he didn't because he
right.
wanted to, it was to serve to make sure that Pharaoh knew that it was a certainty, I guess.
Right, probably, yeah.
Okay. Go ahead. You have something? Okay.
Okay, so it's fascinating to me that Joseph was forgotten for a certain time.
Yeah.
For 2 years, he was forgotten.
Yep.
And then God said, it's like he said, okay, time's up, long enough. Time for him to get out of there. His time has come.
Yeah.
So he makes him have this dream. He causes everything to happen in his time.
Yes.
His timing's perfect.
Yes.
Love it.
Yes. And that's a lot of times why I feel like we end up in positions that we think, this is terrible. I don't know how much longer I can stand it. And he's basically saying, well, there's some other stuff over here I'm taking care of. It's not quite done yet. So just hang on. You'll be all right. I'll take care of it. I'll get you. I'll be back. Kind of a thing.
Yeah, we're on God's time, not ours.
That's right. That's
Because
right.
if you look at the major players in the Bible, they all had big gaps when they were working and when they weren't.
Yep.
And not only on God's time, is when we are ready to learn the lesson.
Yeah.
And God can move forward, right?
Yep.
Because, things get repeated until we get it. Another turn in the desert,
Yeah.
We ain't get the lesson.
Yep.
And there always seems to be other people involved
Yes.
in whenever we're in that waiting time, that gap.
Yep.
There's almost always other people
Sure.
on the other end
Yeah. Yeah.
that God needs to deal with.
Yep. Yeah. That's one of the things that let's see. It's not easy to put this any way but bluntly, and that is that one of the hardest things to do is to realize that it's not all about you. It's not all about us. It's God has things He's trying to do, and He wants to use us to execute His plans. And He can use us much easier if we are willing tools than if we're obstinate. But He can use you if you're obstinate. And my favorite example of that is Pharaoh, the Pharaoh with Moses, because God told Pharaoh, I raised you up for this very purpose. I could have wiped you guys all out in a second, but I raised you up for this very purpose. So He'll use the tool, whether the tool is willing or not.
And then, often when we're in the pit, I'll call it,
The pit, yeah.
in the dry land, God brings other people
Yep.
for us to minister.
Yep.
I mean, I've just gone, since the Lord told me to come to Arizona, but it's like I didn't want to hit this state, and I was like I was still in Minnesota on a nasty ice storm, skating all over. I had no grounding, I had no direction.
Yep.
And I knew He told me to come, but yet everything fell apart.
Yeah.
And I ended up in women's shelter. I ended up living on my car, but God brought people
Yeah.
that He had me minister to
Yeah.
mightily.
Yep.
And the same time, wow, was I stretched and humbled and
Yeah.
a whole new world out there that he's opened up to me, how pathetic, how broken our system is.
Oh yeah, and you know, you a lot of times you can't really fully see that until quite a bit later. Yeah. If not only because it's hard to see it while you're in it, but also because you're not capable really of seeing it while you're in it. You got to get okay. Me, I mean, I sometimes have to get far away and look back on it and say, oh, now I get that. Yeah, now I see. Yeah.
You know, if he wasn't as close to God as he was, and he was more human like the rest of us, he probably would have went, when he finally made it to Pharaoh, he would have probably said, yeah, I know what the dream is, but what's it worth to you? I'm tired of living in prison. But let's negotiate here.
Yeah. Well, like you say, he was probably a better man than I. But let's talk about the dreams for a couple of minutes. First of all, like I was saying, those first two dreams about his brothers, with his brothers and his dad, those were pretty easy to interpret. The ones with the baker and the cupbearer, those weren't easy for me to interpret at all. As a matter of fact, I had to sit there and even now think a little bit about what's different between the two dreams. You know, the cupbearer and the baker, both of them had, one of them had 3 vines and the other one had three clusters of grapes or something, and 3 baskets. And the 3 clusters of grapes, ripened and matured, and he was able to crush them and put them in the Pharaoh's cup and present it to him. Well, that would certainly imply restoration to his old job. The baker, on the other hand, had these baskets on his head, and the birds kept coming, eating the bread out of the top basket. Well, that's much different than presenting a cup to the Pharaoh, and so that was, I guess, emblematic of the birds eating his flesh after his head was chopped off. So that's interesting. But these were, I mean, the interpretation is just, I think, brilliant. But I could never come close to that. The 7 cows, 7 sleek, beautiful cows, and then 7 gaunt, ugly cows, and the ugly cows eat the good cows, and I'd have never figured that out. And Joseph, not only did he figure it out, but he gives him other information. He says, number one, each cow is a year, so that's how long it's going to last. And he said, so he's given you your plan of attack, the way you handle this in the dream, and that you need to take care of those 7 nice cows so that the 7 ugly cows will have something to eat. And then I just thought that was fascinating. Anyway, I wanted to encourage you one other way. There's an amazing amount of junk on the internet. You have to get real critical about what you're going to waste your time on and not let it lead you in different directions. But I printed out, I found with just one Google shot, a paper. It's by somebody at Bar Ilan University, which is a university in Israel. And it says it's a study sheet on weekly Torah portion. It's by a woman named, I don't know if it's a woman or not, Dr. Masha Turner. And it's the dreams in Joseph's story. Okay? And it's a nice, I was going to read it, but I don't really want to read it. It's about 5 pages. Do you want to read it? Well, I could. Okay, I'll read some of it. I was going to invite you to go look at it. You can go ahead and get it real easily by looking up, if you just Google Joseph's dreams and her name, Masha Turner. Let me read at least a little bit of it so you can get an idea. She's from the Department of Philosophy, it says here. Dreams play a major role in Joseph's story. There are 3 pairs of dreams. Joseph's dreams, the dreams of Pharaoh's ministers, that is the cupbearer and the baker, and Pharaoh's dreams. In each pair, the links between the 2 dreams are very strong. From the literary standpoint, the dreams constitute a central axis around which the plot develops. Joseph's story can be seen as a dream and its meaning tale that opens with a depiction of Joseph's dreams, the bundles of grain in the field, and the stars in the sky bowing down to him, which continues as the narrative unfolds until the realization of these dreams the brothers bowing down to Joseph as Pharaoh's chief minister and the architect of the Egyptian economy. So, like I say, since we know the rest of the story, we know those dreams that Joseph had when he was 17 or so were prophetic and they came true, right? One can also see in each pair of the dreams the turning point that drives the narrative forward. Joseph's dreams turn his brothers against him and lead to his being sold into bondage. The minister's dreams help him to achieve fame and fortune. His accurate interpretations of their dreams turn him from a nameless prisoner to a successful interpreter of dreams whose skills are recommended before Pharaoh's throne and who is thus summoned to the royal court. Pharaoh's dreams provide Joseph with an opportunity to prove his abilities as an interpreter of dreams and as an advisor. In addition, these dreams bring about Joseph's appointment as ruler of all Egypt and as a chief provider of food to the nation, an appointment that ultimately caused Jacob and his entire family to take up residence in Egypt. So the point that she's making, I guess, if it's a she, is that each of these pairs of dreams provides a big change in Joseph's life. It makes the story take a whole different turn from what you would have expected. It says the dreams are related in the first person, and through the excitement and amazement of the dreamer, express the authentic experiences of the dreamer as well as providing an accurate picture of the dream's events. In each dream, there is an unusual, unnatural event that inspires wonder. One of the things I was thinking about that is his brothers got so upset with him because of those dreams. You remember? And Pharaoh, when Pharaoh was telling of his dreams, he was. The Bible goes into some detail. He says the cows are the ugliest cows I had ever seen. And so the point is these dreamers, these are clearly not just your average everyday run-of-the-mill dream. These are something that's significant in their life, and they really need some answers. So the alien, unreal quality of the dreams in general is expressed here in personification, in the activation of things, in the acceleration of events, in the omission of certain stages and natural processes, and so forth. The dreamers in Joseph's story experience dreams that are highly relevant to their own future. Joseph's dreams prophesy that he will one day have dominion over his own brothers. The ministers have dreams about their immediate fate, and Pharaoh, who is ruler, identifies himself both with his people and his land, has a dream about the fate of all Egypt. So it says, do you mind? You want to go on a little more? The dream is a divine message. The motif of the dream is closely related to the substance and essential nature of our narrative. In Joseph's story, we encounter the concept of a dream as a divine message that reveals to us, through various allusions, what will happen to us in the future. This point is presented in the clearest possible manner through the explicit explanation Joseph gives to Pharaoh. God's intentions have been conveyed to Pharaoh. In other words, that's another thing that ties on to what you said. Joseph is very clear about this. I don't interpret dreams. But God, this dream is God telling you what he's about to do. So that's pretty cool, I thought. This element can be seen throughout the narrative, as we can see from the reactions of both the dreamers and those who hear the dreams. Dreams are not taken lightly in Joseph's story. Joseph relates every detail of his dreams and calls upon his brothers and his father to note their future significance. The brothers and Jacob relate in two ways to Joseph's dream. On the one hand, there's fear regarding what will take place in the future, and on the other hand, there's a protest against Joseph's audacity because the brothers and Jacob assume that his dreams are either an indication of future events or the reflection of his desires and ambitions. That's okay. Not only do the dreams reveal the future, they sometimes have an impact on future events. Joseph's dreams and Pharaoh's dreams are warnings of what will happen in the future. Let me see if I can go into something a little more fun here. With regard to his special skills needed to interpret dreams, various approaches are offered in Joseph's dreams. His brothers and his father interpret his dreams by themselves in a simple and natural manner. From their immediate reaction, it is clear that according to Joseph's brothers and Jacob, Joseph's dreams have a clear message. Furthermore, Jacob and his other sons believe that this message can easily be understood and that no special skills are required. In contrast with Joseph's dreams, Pharaoh's imprisoned ministers do not regard their dreams contain an easily understandable message. Okay, I think I'll quit with that one. Let me see if there's one other thing. There's a couple things I wanted to at least point out here. Have any of you ever had a dream that you think was from God? Have you really? I can only remember one that I had. To sum up, okay, how about if I skip to the sum up part? To sum up, objects are regarded as symbols and sometimes as time units. So, the 3 baskets and the 3 clusters of grapes were 3 days, and the 7 cows and the 7 heads of grain were 7 years. Says the dream narrative is read as an allusion of a future event. In other words, the dream tells you what's going to happen. And the words used by the dreamer in the depiction of the dream are significant, and the interpretation of the dream is based in part on these words. In other words, the dreamer, let's look at Pharaoh, the dreamer has to relate the dream to Joseph, and Joseph has to understand what the dream was from his point of view by the words that he uses. And so that's why I put out the part where he says, they were the ugliest cows I'd ever seen. This dream obviously had a big impact on him. And he says the repetition of the dream indicates that God is firmly resolved to carry out his will without delay. Anyway, the reason I found this article very interesting, but I wanted to also point out that you can do stuff like this pretty easily on the internet. And it's fun to ask those questions. I never had realized, for example, that the story of Joseph has 6 dreams, 3 sets of 2. And that right there is kind of a, wonder why you did that type thing. So all kinds of fun stuff there. Masha, Masha Turner. Here, you can look at this if you want to.
I was amazed also how Pharaoh gave the glory to God. He said, how
Yes.
could we find someone with the spirit of God? So, like
Yes.
the
Yeah, we didn't
world
quite
is-
finish, but that's exactly right. Let's go ahead and see. Do I have another question over here? Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to point out there's a backstory going on here too. You had all his magicians and his
Yeah.
priests and everything that couldn't interpret it,
Yeah.
and Joseph's God is not their God.
Yep.
And so it's real interesting that, he proved he knew what he was doing with with the baker and the cupbearer.
Yep.
But it's real interesting that Pharaoh bought it so quick
Yes.
based on that environment that he's in.
Yes. Well, you're right, that subplot or that other aspect of the thing is interesting to me because he's, Pharaoh being Pharaoh, probably has plenty of these guys hanging around on permanent retainer, living a very good life, and he comes to him and he says, interpret these dreams. And they start blabbing around, and you can see, right away he says, well, that can't be right, or that's not right. I mean, he knows when he hears the interpretation whether it's
Right.
right or not. I think that's an interesting point, yeah. Let me finish the chapter because that covers what you had just said. Verse 33 in chapter 41 says, and now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Boy, you talk about a good day at the prison. Man. So, I don't know. It's fascinating. This is just very fascinating, what's going on here, and how the Bible is so well constructed. There's so much order to it, but yet these plots move along in a very systematic way, and there's so much you can learn. Like, there's tons we can learn. It's no secret, I'm sure, that Joseph is a type of the Messiah, right? Because you look at virtually every other character in the book of Genesis, and they all have flaws. It's hard to find a flaw in Joseph. The best I could find myself is his possible taunting of his brothers by telling them the dreams. But on the other hand, if they were dreams from God and he felt like God needed them to know, then it wasn't taunting. And there's no indication that he treated it that way. The taunting aspect of it, or the superiority thing, or whatever it might be, is on the heart of the hearer, not on Joseph's heart. Yeah. Did you want to say something? Kid?
Yeah, I think Joseph was proud of his dreams and he wanted to share them, not like, I'm better than you.
Yeah, yeah.
But, you know, a lot of people, even where we are, they think, well, you think you're better than me.
Yes.
Which is not the truth.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it was the brothers' hearts that were in the wrong place.
That's exactly
and not
right.
Joseph.
Yeah. And like I say, if you have a dream that you think is clearly from God, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. It comes with and you should tell it, right? Yeah.
Joseph was basically out in the field tending the sheep,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And didn't have much connection with people.
Yeah.
It wasn't like he came in every night.
Yeah.
So he's out there connecting with God, has this dream,
Yeah.
and he's so excited when he finally gets home
Yeah.
to share it
Yeah.
because he has no one else to talk to out there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they look at him like, oh, who are you?
Yeah. Who are you?
You're just a sheep herder out
Yeah.
there, you little squirt.
Yep. That's exactly right. Not only that, but that Dad likes you best, and that makes us mad. It's like Tommy Smothers, right? Mom always liked you best. So I'm wanting to quit here because the next section gets into how Joseph does his job. And although we have some time, I'm not prepared. So are there any other things you guys would like to talk about before we call it a night? Okay. Do you think it was from God? Okay.
I have 3 daughters, and there's been some issues. And which bothered me, and during our 40 days of pondering and change and repentance and so on, you know, those are things I really was thinking on.
Mm-hmm.
And feeling very sad in my heart about it. And the Lord pulled me away from everything and everybody and brought me here and just everything that's happened, a new area. And so I have not been remembering my dreams lately. We're supposed to, dream supposedly, and I hadn't been remembering. So I think it was just last week I said, Lord, I'd like to, remember a dream.
Mm-hmm.
So that night I had a dream, and I remembered it when I woke up. And it was about my 3 daughters. We were all together, and things were just like, type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, thank you, God, that's not exactly what I wanted. And a few days later, one of my daughters called, and she apologized.
That's good.
And I said, oh, what made you call now? Because she had done some apology earlier before I left, but then turned right around and I could hear her talking. And my heart was heavy. It's been heavy about it. And I said, God, I know your word says to go to them. Whoever offends you, go. But I said, I just am hesitant. I don't feel like I am to do that now. And there she called and made amends. And said how sorry she was. And I said, well, what made you do this now? And she said, well, I'd just been thinking and so on. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I've often thought. I mean, like I say, I've had one, maybe two dreams, but they've never been like these. You know what I mean? They've never been the kind of things that are real prophetic and talk about something that's definitely going to happen. But it's interesting, in the one or two cases that's ever happened to me, they're different enough that you know it's God. Because the dreams you normally have, I mean, you know, everybody, it says, it's believed, everybody dreams at night. And I know 99% of the ones I dream, I forget, like you. But I've often believed, I think one of the things God has taught me is, when he wants to get my attention, he can get my attention. So now that we've talked about dreams, we'll see how many people have dreams next week. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so about 3 weeks ago, I had two dreams. They were back to back, and I know the meaning of both of them. So the one goes like this. There's some people, and we're in a parcel of land, and around us, it looks like there's a river of lava flowing. Looks like a volcano or something's erupting, something's happening. And then I look up into the sky, and there's a big glob of fire, but it's encompassed in like a ball. So you can see it coming this way, and it's about to hit the impact. And then I get out of there. We get out of there. But that signified judgment unto me, what's going to come. And then the second dream was the next night or a next night. They were very close together. And I was laying in bed, and I was sleeping, and I didn't know it was almost morning, but this dream was so intense it woke me up. I heard these shofars all around blowing, and the resignation of them went into my being, into my body. And it was so intense. It was like my body was ready to take off. And then I woke up. So.
Yeah, those are interesting. I mean, you know, like I say, wish I was Joseph. Yeah. Like I say, if nothing else, having read the stories and had the discussion, I bet we think about it more. Yeah. Let me close in prayer. Father God, thank you. Thank you for your word. Thank you for the things that are in it. Thank you for the instruction that it provides. Thank you for the witness and testimony it is to you and your existence, and the fact that you clearly have everything under your control and that you are well in command of what's going on. Help us to be willing tools. Help us to understand that our most important objective is just to keep our eyes on you and to be obedient. And I'd ask that you'd bless us as we go through our coming week until we meet again next week. In Yeshua's name, amen. Okay, thank you very much, and we'll do it again.